Troy Grant is the Inspector General of Water Compliance. Troy, how are you going today?
Yeah, terrific. Thanks for having us on Flow FM.
Not a problem. And speaking of the flow, it's very much a concern in the Murray-Darling Basin, and you keep an eye on whether people are doing the right thing. Just give us an explanation of your role.
Yeah, on the 5th of August, the Inspector General for Water Compliance Office was stood up as a statutory independent oversight body and given powers under the Water Act legislation of 2007 to oversight and hold compliance roles concerning the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, the Water Act, and oversighting the water management activities of the Commonwealth Department of Water and each of the basin jurisdictions' water regulators. So as part of that role, it can simply be described as oversight, which is risk to the system, and compliance, which is risk that we identify within the system.
And when it comes to, identifying risk and working out just where there might be issues when it comes to water use and compliance, I guess metering is a pretty critical element to that. How are we travelling across the basin states in terms of the sufficiency of metering and monitoring?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. There's certainly been a long journey in relation to states' compliance with their metering obligations that they signed up to as part of the Compliance Compact, which is a critical component of the intergovernmental agreements of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. 2025 is the target for them to have reached the highest level of monitoring via coverage of the meters being across the basin, also relative to making sure that the standard of the meters meets the AS 4747 standard, and also the telemetry component of metering is a critical part. So each jurisdiction's at different stages of that evolution. There was a massive lag and a lot of resistance in the Northern Basin to metering, but there's been seismic gains made in the last 12 to 18 months. So it is tracking pretty well, but each jurisdiction has different types of challenges, and they're working through that, and we do that work through the Regulatory Leaders Forum, which we've established, and that's each state has their regulatory leaders who are in charge of compliance. We meet regularly, and we're meeting again Monday week in Tamworth to make sure that we're operating on a level playing field, learning lessons from each other as to how we can get better consistency across the basin and raise standards. And that's working really well. And now we have a metering report card that's available on our webpage at igwc.gov.au that will give you a scorecard and a report card as to how each of the jurisdictions are tracking. The first one's up there. It's using a little bit of old data, and the next one is due mid-year, which will show the significant improvement that's been made by each jurisdiction.
Now, if I could just sort of paraphrase your role and correct me with anything that's incorrect here, but basically there's a lot of finger-pointing that happens up and down the basin about people taking more water than they should be able to in different areas. Your role is somewhat to create confidence independently that people are doing the right thing?
Yeah, exactly right. So we are an independent body. The back of our operations, like HR, finance, and that is supported by the department within the Commonwealth, but we operate completely independently. We report to the Senate Estimates Committee. We don't report directly to the Minister. We do work with the Federal Water Minister and ministers in each state. But the independence we have is critical to being able to give the community confidence that we can call out what's good and bad in the basin and the way things are being managed. So I did that with the lack of accredited water resource plans in New South Wales mid last year, which certainly got them moving. Every one of the 20 in New South Wales has now been submitted and is being considered for accreditation. I think 4 groundwater plans have been accredited to date. And that's important because we need a level playing field to be available. The water resource plans articulate what and how the sustainable diversion limits of water take, the consumptive water that can be taken in each of those different valleys, 33 of them in total across the basin. And that's an annual stock take and a check that happens. And if they're over their extraction, well, there's make good measures that we have the power to enforce. And that's the role that we have, is to make sure that everyone else is doing their job properly and to call it out when it's not occurring and hold them to account.
Now, those make good measures you mentioned there in terms of enforcement action under the powers you've got under the legislation, are there some examples of where you've had to take that in the last couple of years in the role?
Not to this point. There's been really good compliance in the 13 accredited plans. The critical issue that we've had is that under law, we have no power to enforce the the SIDLAM results if there is not an accredited WRP. And that's where the big gap was, that none of the New South Wales WRPs were accredited. Therefore, any excess take in that water year that was discovered during the water accounting audits, we have not been able to take formal action. So there's two valleys that are of concern in New South Wales, but we have no powers currently to enforce that make good, and that's why we're so keen to make sure those plans are accredited, so ultimately those basins can be held to account and everyone can be treated fairly.
Now, people can find out more about your role at igwc.gov.au, but when it comes to a concern, if a community member or an irrigator has a concern about a water take they suspect was not proper, you're not the first port of call, I'm guessing. It's their local water authority?
Yeah, the state regulators are certainly the first call for any suspicions or concerns about illegal water take. We do have the ability to be a compliance operator, a regulator, but it more relates into the step in power. That's when the states are unwilling or unable to act on a certain matter. But people are very free to ring us, and we will refer that matter to the state jurisdiction, and then we will oversight their investigation to make sure that the person that's made the complaint is getting proper service and information back, and that the job's being done properly. So they've got two ports of call. We're setting up a hotline which will be coming live shortly, so people can ring up, similar to a Crime Stoppers type number, and report suspicions of illegal activity as well. That'll help, and everything that we do work-wise, where we study and research various ways that water management is occurring in the basin, is also all up on our webpage. The reports can be read there. It looks at the river operations on the Murray, the work of the Chew, each of the state's jurisdictions. That's some of the bodies of work we've done to date. And we're working on a very transparent process. But what's really keen is we have field offices located throughout the basin at this stage. So we have an office at Albury and Loxton, South Australia, for example, Mildura in Victoria, Dubbo, New South Wales, and Gundawindi in Queensland, that are the local faces. So those field officers can get out and about, meet you firsthand, come to you if you've got any concerns, and be available to you as your first port of call to answer any questions.
Now, you just dropped a term CHEW there. That's the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, I take it. Do you have a role of oversighting the use of water for environmental purposes as well?
Yes, we do, absolutely. We oversight the MDBA and we oversight the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, so apologies for the acronyms. There's plenty of them in the water space. So, yeah, and we oversight every state and we oversight the Commonwealth Water Division. So everyone is under our microscope, and we attend ministerial council meetings to basically speak our mind about what we think's going good, bad, or indifferent. We're not in the discussion about policy about water recovery. We just simply enforce the rules that are agreed upon by the basin jurisdictions in the Commonwealth and what are put into law. So when there's decisions or discussions about, water recovery or what should happen in a project, we're not part of that front-end discussion, but we certainly come in to make sure that compliance is met, accountability is held, and that things are on the right track. And if they're not, we call it out and point them to the right path to follow to get back on track.
Well, Troy Grant is the Inspector General for Water Compliance, and we look forward to hearing about that hotline that you can call sometime soon if you've got any concerns. Thanks for joining us today, Troy.
More than welcome. Happy to talk anytime.